I'm picking up my granddaughter, Sarah, from Northwood High School. As she slid into the passenger seat, I immediately noticed a change. Her usual vibrant energy was gone, replaced by a blankness in her expression. It wasn't sadness or anger, but something more unsettling, an emptiness, like a pilot light had been snuffed out inside. At 15, she should be buzzing with life, but she seemed strangely detached. I greeted her, "Hey, sweetie. How was your day?" She just offered a listless shrug. Concerned, I probed a little deeper. "Did something happen at school, Sarah? Anything bothering you?" Another negative, just a barely audible no. Then, after a heavy silence that stretched out, she uttered a question that has been echoing in my mind ever since. "Grandpa," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "does it ever feel like nothing you do actually matters?" My name is George, and I've been around the block a few times, 87 years, to be exact. I've weathered world wars, crippling economic recessions, devastating family tragedies, and a catalog of personal failures that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But that simple question from my granddaughter, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Because if I'm being honest, I've wrestled with that very question myself more times than I care to admit. The crucial difference, though, is that I'm standing at the twilight of my life, looking back over the landscape, while she's standing at the dawn, gazing into the vast unknown that stretches ahead. And somewhere in the space between those two vastly different perspectives, I think I've finally stumbled upon a profound truth. We're living in a culture completely fixated on impact. It feels like everyone is scrambling to leave their mark, to change the world in some grandiose way, to carve their name into the collective memory. I see it everywhere I look. Young people pouring themselves into high-powered careers that they think will somehow imbue them with significance. People compulsively posting every detail of their lives online, desperately seeking validation from strangers. People measuring their self-worth by the number of followers they have or the amount of attention they can garner. And believe me, I understand the impulse. I truly do. But here's the hard-earned wisdom I've gleaned from nearly 9 decades on this earth. The things that truly matter in the grand scheme of things almost never feel particularly important in the moment they're happening. Let me tell you about my neighbor, Margaret. She lived just 3 houses down from us on Willow Creek Drive for 42 years. Margaret was a schoolteacher, a dedicated educator. She never married, never had children of her own. She poured her heart and soul into teaching 3rd grade at the same unassuming elementary school for her entire career. When she finally retired, the school threw her a small, simple gathering in the gymnasium. Maybe 30 people showed up, mostly fellow teachers and a few former students. There were no TV cameras, no viral social media posts, no soaring speeches that would be etched in history. She received a modest plaque commemorating her years of service and a cheerful bouquet of flowers. 2 years later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. When I heard the news of her passing, I anticipated a quiet, sparsely attended funeral. Margaret had always been a private, unassuming woman, content to live a simple, understated life. But when I arrived at the church that Saturday morning, I was stunned. The place was absolutely packed, standing room only, and one by one, people rose to share their memories of Margaret. A doctor, now a prominent cardiologist, who tearfully recounted how Margaret was the first person who ever made him feel truly intelligent and capable. A woman who ran a successful nonprofit organization, who shared how Margaret had patiently taught her to read when everyone else had given up on her. A man in his 50s, who brought his own daughter to the service, explaining that he had become a teacher himself because of Margaret's profound influence on his life. Story after story poured forth, each one revealing the quiet, yet powerful impact Margaret had had on countless lives. Lives changed. Trajectories altered. All because of a woman who simply thought she was just doing her job. Margaret never set out to revolutionize education or to change the world. She never craved accolades or sought recognition. She just showed up, day after day, year after year, and dedicated herself to the children in front of her. She took the time to learn their names, to understand their individual struggles, to nurture their unique talents. She stayed late after school to help them grasp fractions, or conquer tricky spelling words. Nothing flashy, nothing glamorous, nothing that would ever make headlines. But the ripples of her life were still spreading, decades later, touching people she would never even know. I've come to believe that we've got it all backwards. We seem to think that mattering requires being seen, being known, being celebrated by the masses. But that's not how real life actually operates. Life is built on the accumulation of small, intimate moments between people. A chance conversation that subtly shifts someone's perspective. An unexpected act of kindness that arrives precisely when someone is on the verge of giving up. Showing up for someone when it's deeply inconvenient for you. Actively listening when you'd much rather be talking. These seemingly insignificant things don't feel particularly momentous as they're happening. They feel ordinary, routine, easily dismissed as inconsequential. When I was 39 years old, I went through a particularly rough patch. My small business was teetering on the brink of collapse. Money was incredibly tight. I was drinking far more than I should have been and sleeping far less than I needed to. I felt like a complete and utter failure as a husband, as a father, as a man. One particularly bleak evening, I found myself sitting alone in my car outside a dimly lit bar, agonizing over whether or not to go inside and drown my sorrows. And then, out of the blue, this guy I barely knew, a casual acquaintance named Tom, knocked on my car window. We'd only met maybe twice before, at neighborhood barbecues. He simply said that he was heading down the street to grab a cup of coffee and casually asked if I wanted to join him. Just like that. No dramatic intervention, no judgmental lecture. Just a simple invitation for coffee. We ended up sitting in a quiet corner booth at a 24-hour diner for a couple of hours. He didn't pry into my problems. He didn't offer unsolicited advice or try to fix anything. He just talked about everyday things. His kids, their latest school projects. A fascinating book he was reading. A memorable trip he'd taken years ago. And somehow, in the midst of that completely ordinary conversation, something inside me slowly began to settle. I didn't go into that bar that night. I drove straight home. I can't even recall everything we talked about that evening. But that seemingly insignificant moment mattered. It subtly altered the trajectory of my night, and perhaps even the course of my life. And Tom, bless his heart, probably forgot all about it by the next morning. That's the paradox of mattering. It's almost never dramatic. It rarely announces itself with fanfare. You won't receive a notification on your phone telling you that something you did has just profoundly changed someone's life. Most of the time, you'll never even know the impact you've had. You'll perform some small act that feels utterly insignificant to you, and it'll be the world to someone else. And you'll move on, thinking it didn't amount to anything at all. My beloved wife, Eleanor, who passed away a few years ago, used to be a prolific letter writer. Real handwritten letters, complete with stamps and everything. She'd write to our kids when they were away at college, battling homesickness and navigating the challenges of adulthood. She'd write to old friends she hadn't seen in years, reconnecting and rekindling long-dormant connections. She'd write to distant cousins, to neighbors down the street, to anyone who happened to cross her mind. I used to gently tease her about it. I'd playfully say, "Elle, honey, everyone has cell phones and email now. Why don't you just give them a call?" She'd simply smile serenely and continue writing her letters. After she passed, while I was sorting through her belongings, I discovered several large boxes filled with letters that people had written back to her over the years. And in almost every single one of those letters, the writer mentioned how much Eleanor's letters had meant to them, how they'd carefully saved certain ones for years, rereading them whenever they needed a boost, how they'd turned to them during difficult times, finding solace and comfort in her thoughtful words. She wasn't deliberately trying to matter. She was simply reaching out, connecting with people, sharing a piece of herself. But in doing so, she mattered enormously. Here's the crucial piece of advice I wish someone had given me when I was a young man. Your life doesn't need to be extraordinary to matter. In fact, it probably shouldn't be. The incessant pressure to be exceptional, to stand out from the crowd, to make a huge splash, that pressure ultimately crushes people. It makes them feel as though their perfectly ordinary life isn't somehow enough. Like simply showing up for their family, diligently doing their work with honesty and integrity, being kind and compassionate to strangers. Like none of that truly counts unless it's somehow packaged into something outwardly impressive and attention-grabbing. But the simple truth is that almost everything that holds our world together, the very fabric of society, is woven by people whom no one will ever remember. Parents who wake up in the middle of the night, night after night, to tend to their sick children. Workers who consistently show up on time and perform their jobs with diligence and care. Friends who reach out to check in when they sense that someone is hurting. Volunteers who selflessly serve meals at homeless shelters, clean up trash in public parks, or patiently visit patients in hospitals. People who exercise their right to vote, who diligently recycle, who thoughtfully return shopping carts to the designated corral. Small, unremarkable acts of everyday decency that quietly keep everything from falling apart. You want to know if you truly matter? Don't look for grand pronouncements or public accolades. Just look at the people who are directly in front of you. Are you fully present with them? Are you honest and trustworthy in your dealings? Are you kind and compassionate, even when you don't have to be? Do you keep your promises, both big and small? Do you make room for other people's pain and suffering? Do you genuinely celebrate their joys and successes? These questions won't land you on the cover of a glossy magazine. They won't build your online platform or significantly expand your sphere of influence. But they will ultimately determine whether your life had genuine meaning and whether you truly made a positive difference in the world. I've been pondering my granddaughter's poignant question a great deal lately. Does anything I do actually matter? And I've come to realize that the very question itself is often the root of the problem. Because when we ask ourselves if we matter, we're usually subconsciously asking if we matter in some grandiose, quantifiable way. If we're somehow important, influential, exceptional. But mattering simply doesn't work that way. Mattering is far quieter, more intimate, more personal. It's knowing, deep down, that your presence or your absence would make a tangible difference to the real, flesh and blood people in your life. When my grandson, Michael, was just 7 years old, he was absolutely terrified of water. He wouldn't go anywhere near a swimming pool, not even the shallow end. One summer, I made it my personal mission to help him overcome his fear. For 3 weeks straight, 15 minutes a day, I just stood with him at the edge of the shallow end. I didn't push him, didn't pressure him, didn't lecture him. I just patiently stood there, offering quiet encouragement, while he gradually got used to the feel of the water on his toes, then his ankles, then his knees. By the end of that summer, he was actually swimming, splashing, and having the time of his life. Now he's 23 years old, a strapping young man, and he probably doesn't even remember those seemingly insignificant 15-minute sessions at the pool. But I do, because I know, with absolute certainty, that if I hadn't been there, patient and steady, his fear might have lingered, holding him back from countless opportunities and experiences. That, my friends, is what mattering truly looks like. Not because it's outwardly impressive or worthy of praise, but because it's real, it's tangible, it's deeply personal. The older I get, the more I realize that most of what we spend our lives chasing is ultimately just smoke and mirrors. Status disappears like morning mist. Achievements fade into distant memory. People forget your accomplishments far faster than you'd ever believe. But they don't forget how you made them feel. They don't forget that you showed up for them when they needed you. They don't forget that you truly saw them, acknowledged their existence, valued their worth, especially when they felt utterly invisible to the rest of the world. Those things stick. They resonate forward in ways you'll never fully understand. I was at the grocery store just last week, picking up a few essentials, and the young woman at the checkout counter looked absolutely exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders slumped, moving with a palpable sense of weariness. I could have simply paid for my groceries and left without a word. But instead, I paused and asked her how she was doing. Really asked, with genuine concern in my voice, not just the automatic, perfunctory question we all throw around without thinking. She looked momentarily surprised, and then her eyes suddenly welled up with tears. She confided that she'd been working double shifts all week because her mother was seriously ill. We talked for maybe 3 minutes, tops. I told her that she was doing something truly honorable, that her mother was incredibly lucky to have her as a daughter. When I left the store, she thanked me, not once, but twice, with heartfelt sincerity. Will that fleeting conversation somehow change the course of world history? Of course not. But did it matter to her in that particular moment? I firmly believe that it did. So here's my answer to my granddaughter, Sarah, and perhaps to you, the listener. Yes, what you do matters. But probably not in the grandiose, attention-grabbing ways you might think. It matters in the small, quiet moments. The unglamorous ones. The ones you won't post about on social media or include on your carefully crafted resume. It matters when you consciously choose patience over anger. When you bravely tell the truth, even when lying would be far easier and more convenient. When you selflessly help someone in need, even though no one else is watching. When you choose to stay and persevere, even when leaving would be the simpler, less demanding option. Your life doesn't have to be a dazzling spectacle to matter. It simply has to be honest, authentic, present, and kind. And that's far harder than it sounds, because those seemingly simple qualities require you to truly pay attention. To show up, even when you're utterly exhausted. To care, even when it's deeply inconvenient. But that's where real significance resides. Not in the fleeting spotlight of fame or recognition, but in the steady, quiet, and often unseen work of being fully human with other humans. I'm 87 years old. I don't have all that many years left on this earth. And when I contemplate what I want my life to have ultimately meant, I don't dwell on awards or accolades or professional achievements.